Hello everyone. AM radios hold a special nostalgic value for me. Growing up, when I was surrounded by AM radios. They were a ubiquitous part of my childhood. Growing up, of course, the world changes as it does, and although the radios haven't changed, the content on the airwaves has, and I don't find listening to AM radio particularly appealing anymore. So, after the longest time, I managed to build a small AM radio transmitter through which I can listen to content I enjoy. And this way I can still enjoy using my old AM radios. I was inspired by this channel, Chappy. Chappy has a video demonstrating how to build a very simple AM radio transmitter, and it sounds terrific. Chappy builds all sorts of radio circuits, and the workmanship Chappy puts into his equipment is just unbelievable. So if you're thinking of building a project for inspiration, do yourself a favor, go and look at this channel. I guarantee you'll be impressed. So as I said, the transmitter I built was inspired by Chappy's transmitter. I've made a few minor changes. In particular, I added a preamp circuit. When I built Chappy's circuit on a breadboard, it worked perfectly. The only thing was I needed to have the volume turned all the way up on my iPhone to get a decent amount of modulation. Because I wanted to use this transmitter with equipment that had quite a small output, I decided to build a preamp. The circuit diagram is a little bit messy. The preamp itself is kind of overkill. I started with a simpler preamp circuit, just using, for example, 2 diodes in the bias chain there. And without the transformer connected, it produced a nice undistorted output. There was no crossover distortion. But for some reason, it sounded like the AGC, the automatic gain control in the radios that I was using to test it, were getting swamped by the signal. And so you'd suddenly get very loud output, and then it would become very soft and all of that. So by changing the bias chain, I've put 4 diodes in there, I've put some emitter resistors in there. This circuit resembles a high-powered audio amplifier output stage. But anyway, with this circuit, the output sounds really good. But the ears can be deceiving. Even though it sounds good, I wanted to go a step further in the testing to see how linear the modulation was with this circuit. Just a quick recap with AM transmitters, in the absence of an audio input, produce a carrier signal, like the one you can see here. When you modulate the carrier with an audio signal like this one, you get a modulated output like this. Now, even to my eye, this modulated signal doesn't look quite right. But how can we get a more objective visualization of the modulation linearity here? One thing we can do is use an oscilloscope in XY mode. We connect the X trace, or the horizontal trace, to the audio signal, and the Y vertical trace to the transmitter output. This image here shows the oscilloscope in XY mode. We have no signals on either input, X or Y, and so the trace sits in the middle as a dot. It's undeflected. If we apply an audio signal, you can see here that the trace is deflected in the X or horizontal axis only. If we remove the audio and just inject the RF signal into the Y-axis, we can see a deflection in the vertical axis. If we have an audio signal at the input and an unmodulated carrier on the output, we get a nice perfect rectangle. Now in this case, I've got the audio fed into the input, but I have the gain of the preamp turned all the way down. So I'm measuring the audio from its source, but it's not getting a chance to modulate the carrier. So we get a nice square shape. But as I increase the audio input signal, the shape turns to a trapezoid. And this is what we'd expect to see. As the audio input signal goes negative, we'd expect to see the RF carrier become smaller. And so as the audio becomes negative, it moves to the trace moves to the left of the screen, and we can see the RF output get smaller. As the audio input increases and goes fully positive, we expect to see the carrier increase to its maximum extent, and that does it on the right side of the screen. We can determine the degree of modulation by measuring C and measuring B, then applying this modulation formula, and in this particular case the modulation is 56%. For a perfectly linear modulation, the sides of the trapezoid should be a nice sharp straight line, which they kind of are in this case, but they should also be symmetrical around the horizontal midline. If we compare my measured output here to what would be considered an ideal output, as shown here in the red, we can see that the output of the AM transmitter here isn't extremely linear. There are probably other adjectives you could use to describe it, but I'll be charitable to myself. I may tweak the circuit later on to make it more linear, but for now I just enjoy it for what it is. Here's a brief sample of the sound. I've recorded this as it's played back through a small AM radio. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Thanks for watching and have a terrific day.